The views expressed on the following program do not necessarily reflect the views of Money Radio staff, management, or advertisers, and do not represent an offer to buy or sell any securities. Some interviews heard on this program may be sponsored by the participants. It's time for Health Futures with Cypress Home Care Solutions, Bob Roth. This is Arizona's only show dedicated to providing you with expert advice on how to live a longer, healthier, and happier life. To learn more, call 602-264-8009. That's 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Bob Roth.
Good afternoon. You're listening to Health Futures, taking stock in you, and it must be Friday, and indeed it is. We're coming at you live from the Scottsdale Air Park Money Radio Studios, 1510 AM, 105.3 FM, and the World Wide Web, moneyradio1510.com. If this is the first time you've tuned into our show is about how our older adult population can live a healthier, happier life. And how do they do that? They do that by listening right here to the show. And it's not to me, the host, it's about the guests I bring. So I'm going to just cut right to the chase, and I'm going to introduce our guest. I have coming into us through technology, thank goodness. We do have tech. And my guest today is not in town, but he is present, and he is on the phone and on my computer. I am happy to welcome to the studio David Wilson. He is with Aarons DeAngeli Law Group. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, it's good to have you. And, I've had a number of elder law attorneys here on the show. And, I think you can never talk enough about the work that you do. And it's unfortunate that, so many of our older adults get taken advantage of, and they don't have their affairs in order. And I don't want to jump right into some of the conversations without doing a proper introduction for you, David, because you are a lawyer. You operate out of multiple states, so I would love for you to share with our listeners a little bit about your bio and background, and then I would want to take a deep dive into some of these challenges that we're dealing with in our communities.
Oh, love it. Love it. Bob, so I am a certified elder law attorney. There are only about 10 of us in Arizona. And what that means is that my practice is almost exclusively deals with, seniors and the issues that they face. And because of that, so much of it centers around long-term care, really. My background, so I was an estate planning attorney for a long time. I have a postgraduate degree in tax, believe it or not, and did a lot of trust planning and stuff like that. There came a point about 10 years ago where I started doing more and more sort of long-term care work, and it eventually just sort of became the only thing that I do. And so it's true, I practice in Idaho and in Arizona, both. I'm a proud graduate of Arizona State College of Law, and it's actually fascinating. When I was in law school, I thought, hey, the best thing that I could possibly do as a lawyer is be the snowbird and actually go back and forth to the best weather. And it sort of worked out that way, believe it or not. But
and that's why you're not here right now, because it's really blazing hot, and I'm sure the weather in Idaho is just amazing. But carry on.
It is a beautiful day. Yeah, and I was supposed to be down there today, and I had a commitment I couldn't get out of, and so I'm here. But I'm already planning on being there. I'm there Monday, actually, so in Arizona, back in Monday. So I get these brief intervals where I get the nice weather. But yeah, Idaho's gorgeous today.
Nice. And certainly, being a student at the great Arizona State University Law School, I don't know if it was Sandra Day O'Connor at the time you went, but they have great notoriety universally in the work that they do, and attorneys that they put out like yourself. You made the comment, believe it or not, that you have a specialization in tax, and I think that's so important in the work you do, especially when you practice as an estate planning attorney initially and now are into elder law, how important it is to really understand the tax codes because they are changing almost daily, if not yearly.
Boy, it's true. Yeah. And one of the things people have asked me several times is sort of, what kind of, now that you're doing sort of elder law over the last decade and a half, doing elder law more or less exclusively, do you even use your tax? I say, man, every day. It is when someone is staring down the barrel of, okay, we've worked our whole life to sort of put ourselves into a position where we can, be comfortable, be secure in retirement, and now, my spouse had a stroke and we're paying, $11,000 a month for a nursing home after the stroke. What do we do next? Understanding both the benefits side of things, right? Understanding what help there might be to help pay for that care is important. Understanding the details about, hey, what do we want our powers of attorney to say, or our will or our trust to say? Okay, that's important too. But if you don't understand sort of the other factors that come into play, how will this change, sort of our tax situation, or are there decisions we need to make about some of the strategies of what we might do next, and how will that impact going forward, what that tax picture might be? But how will it impact not only our income tax picture, but will there be any tax consequences for our kids if we do certain things to try and plan for long-term care, and end up changing how our estate plan works in order to do that? Will that have tax consequences? Everything from will we get capital gains if we sell our house to will we, where all kids have to pay capital gains if we give our house to them and they sell it, to is this a deductible healthcare expense, and how will that change what we actually, if we're budgeting, how we're going to spend our money? How will this impact that? And I think too often people who only deal with a single subject area as an attorney or in any field really, and aren't maybe as prepared to deal with all of these different subject areas that sort of come into play at these crucial moments, I think that can be problematic.
No doubt. And, when I read your bio, I mean, the thing that really appealed to me, and that's why I brought up the tax piece, is that your practice centers around asset protection and on helping clients navigate the financial maze that is long-term care. And I mean, having that skill set in your tool belt really makes you so, it gives you such an edge in terms of what you can do for the clients that you serve.
Boy, I certainly hope so. We pride ourselves on really trying to make sure that everything doesn't look like a nail. When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I think one of the things that a good attorney needs to do to really help their clients is be able to say, hey, the solutions, we need to look at various different solutions. And some of those solutions might be where the attorney might be the one that really helps. I've had clients come in before and I've said to them, look, the most important thing you need to do is change the wording in your estate planning documents. And that's something I can do for them. And that's great, and they can become a client of mine and I can get the work done. I've had other clients come in, said, here's my situation, and describe it. And I said, listen, you don't need me. What you really need is you need a good care manager, or you need a good placement company, or you need a good in-home care company. Let's find you someone who can actually help with what you need right now, rather than trying to fit you into some kind of pattern or so that I can find the right solution. It's kind of amazing. I would guess probably 30% of the people that call my office get an answer from me that is, you don't need me, but let's find the right resource for you. And that's really important.
No doubt. As we wind down this first segment, I would be remiss in not really begin to talk about planning and how important that is. And I know we won't get to all the aspects of it in this first segment, but planning is so critical to the success of anybody's long-term care goals, right? I mean, you've got, it's that old adage, if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail, right?
Totally. No question. If there's one single thing that I say over and over and over again, it's that you will have way more options and flexibility the earlier that you're able to go ahead and plan and say, hey, I want to put myself in a position where I get to make the decisions rather than someone else making them for me.
You know, we had Katie Brenneman here on the studio a couple months ago. She introduced the two of us, and, you know, one of the things that I really love about the work that you do, and I know she does as well, is that whole planning and asset protection piece. I want to get more into that in the second segment. We're down one, David, and it goes really fast. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth. I got David Wilson here in the studio with me. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Now back to Health Futures, taking stock in you. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Cypress Home Care Solutions, Bob Roth.
Welcome back. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth, and we're in our second segment. And if you're just tuning in, I've got David Wilson here in the studio with me. Actually, he's coming through our technology website as well as telephone. We use the telephone because the sound quality is more predictable and clearer utilizing the telephone. But David is with the firm of Ahrens and D'Angeli Law Group, and they're elder law attorneys. And if you missed that first segment, he talked about his background being an estate planner, having a specialization in tax, and we talked about a lot of different things. And you can catch that up on our website at cypresshomecare.com. Click on the media button, drop down, and you'll see the radio show. You'll catch this show and many, many more. So, David, we teed up this segment to really talk about planning and how important it is to have a plan. And if you have a plan, then you can at least articulate to your family members what your wishes are. And there's no better gift that somebody can give a family member by having a plan in place. And, you know, I want to pick up on some of the things that you and I talked about at the break and as well as before the show, how important it is to plan. And I would love for you to share, maybe even illustrate some situations that you had come across where people hadn't planned properly, and had they would have averted the emotional and financial stress that they underwent.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I think one of the key points that I try to get across often when I'm talking about this subject is that when we talk about planning looks different when you're 45 years old than when you're 75 years old and looking at the possibility of long-term care. And, you know, a lot of times people come to me and they say, hey, you know, we're in this crisis situation. You know, loved one had a stroke, or loved one has dementia, or loved one has Parkinson's, or we have a physical injury that's causing us to need this sort of long-term care situation. You know, what do we do next? And one of the very first things that I want to do in that situation is look at their existing sort of estate planning documents, powers of attorney, will, you know, maybe they have a family trust, something like that. But as an example of how those documents can look very different, what an appropriate document looks like can be very different. You know, in your financial power of attorney, a financial power, they're not all created equal. A financial power of attorney is this document that says, hey, if I'm not able to make decisions for myself, I want my loved one to be able to sign for me. I want my loved one to be able to make financial decisions on my behalf if I can't do that. And that's very powerful. You know, I'm 45 years old. That's why I always use that age, because I have my own financial power of attorney in place, naming my wife and then my brother. And what I've put into there is I want them to be able to handle my finances, handle my affairs, and that's great. But there are certain things that we don't necessarily put into a financial power of attorney when someone's 45 and healthy that maybe we want in there later in life. And I'll give you a really easy example of that. I don't want my brother right now to be able to create a trust on my behalf. He doesn't need to be able to do that. You know, I've got my own documents in place. It's not a role that I could really imagine him needing to do. But if I were 75 and I were going into long-term care, potentially, I might want my loved one to be able to create a trust for me that might help me protect my assets if I needed them. And that's not true for everybody. Not everybody wants their financial power of attorney to be able to take that step. But for some people, that's really important. Like, for example, if you're using Altex or Medicaid to pay for care, you might have to create a trust by rule. And so having that power in a financial power of attorney can be really important. I had a client come to me a couple of weeks ago where, they said the wife came into my office, the husband has dementia. Unfortunately, she waited until he can't really understand what's going on. He's far gone in that process. And, she said, okay, we're looking at doing some kind of long-term planning. I said, okay, let me look at your financial power of attorney. We looked at that document. I said, look, this is limited. There's some things that you can do. It's called a general power of attorney. But there's some specific powers I wish we had, but we don't. And in her case, all that's going to mean is expense. We're going to go to court and we're going to get a judge to order that, yes, this is appropriate for her to take these extra steps, these trust planning steps on her husband's behalf. And at the end of the day, we're going to be able to solve that problem. But the delay and the cost of trying to get, and the invasiveness, right, the annoyance of having to go to go in front of a judge and say, hey, the power of attorney doesn't explicitly give us this ability, but it's necessary. We have to do this in order to protect assets in this long-term care situation. We're going to be able to make that happen, I think. Although you never know, but I've in a situation like hers, I've never had a judge say no, because it's pretty obvious that's what needs to happen. But gosh, that's unfortunate that we have to take that extra step and that time delay and money delay to get done what we need to get done. The other thing that is like really important for her that I've told her, listen, just one more example as far as planning goes, is that in her particular case, her husband is never going to have the mental ability, the cognitive capacity to manage his own finances. We're going to need to get something in place. And she, unfortunately, has cancer. So the likelihood that she'll survive or that she will not survive, that she will not outlive him is high, right? And we're worried that if she passes while he still needs this dementia care, that where he's going to need help. So her will right now says, hey, I want to leave everything to my husband if he's still alive when I die. Almost everyone's will says that if you're a married couple. My will says that. My will says if I die, I want everything to go to my wife if she survives me. That's not appropriate in this case. There's a much better solution. And so what we're going to be doing with her will is we're going to be saying, listen, we're going to take her estate, her half of the couple's assets, and she is going to create on her death a trust for him. And we're allowed to do it in a way, a married couple is allowed to do it in a way that does two really neat things for him. Number one, it will allow her to name someone to act as a trustee for him, so that one of her children, in her case, she's going to name to say, hey, we need someone to be able to step in and handle these funds for dad. But the other huge benefit for him is going to be that whatever she leaves, her half of the estate that she leaves in trust for her husband, we can do it in a way that if he needs something like Altex benefits or Medicaid benefits down the road, that the assets she is leaving for him don't count as far as him becoming eligible or him having to pay back the state of Arizona when he dies if he does use Medicaid or whatever. And so there's some huge advantages to her leaving it in trust for him. Now, does my will say that? No, that's not something I have in place at age 45 and healthy. But if I were 75 and I were concerned about that, that is definitely something I would want in my planning. And so with her, one of the problems with their planning, we're going to have to go get fixed in court. The other problem, her will, she still has capacity. So we're going to go ahead and change that now to be sort of more appropriate for what's going on with them, to plan for his care that's coming up.
God, there are a lot of moving parts in situations like that, and you've really got to be able to pull it apart and take a look at each and every aspect of it and its effects of it.
Yep.
What's interesting is our engineer, James, before we started our show, I told him about you being our guest on the show. And one of the things he talked about, and, James, you're always welcome to chime in, is that a lot of times people have great intentions, right? And they put stuff together, but then all of a sudden the children get involved, right? And especially with somebody that may have mild cognitive impairment, and next thing you know, they're positioning themselves versus their siblings, and they're wanting to get more than the other. And I'm sure you've never heard this story before, right?
Right.
I mean, and that part of putting this plan together is to protect from happening. But oftentimes, people go rogue and they unravel those types of plans too. I'm sure you see that as well.
Oh boy, yeah. It's interesting. One of the things that when I was in law school, when I first took the very first time I ever took an estate planning class, I can still remember. In fact, that class, that professor, just an amazing estate planning attorney in Phoenix, who still practices and is a wonderful guy. One of the things that he said that has always stuck with me, and I teach it, it's one of the first things that I teach to young associate attorneys that we hire, is we sit them down almost on day one or day two, and we say, listen, as you're starting to think and use your brain to help come up with solutions for folks, you need to consider that from a practical standpoint, many plans fail. And you can come up with the most genius, riveting, complicated plan for someone, but if the complications inherent in that plan set them up so that it's unlikely that from a practical standpoint they're actually going to be able to follow through and make that plan work, then you haven't done them any favors. So, like, for example, with the couple that I just mentioned, one of the conversations I had with her as the wife was, tell me about what's going on with the kids. What's the relationship between them? Do they like each other? Do they get along? Are they on the same page? Do they trust you? Do you trust them? What's their relationship like with you?
David, I want to pick this up. We're at halftime. It came up on us really fast there at Health Futures. Stick around. We'll pick up on that story and much more. We'll be right back.
Now back to Health Futures, taking stock in you. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Cypress Home Care Solutions, Bob Roth.
Welcome back. Always like a little who, starting out the second half right here at Health Futures, Money Radio Studios here in the Air Park. And if you're just tuning in, I've got David Wilson here in the studio with me. He's actually coming through technology, through my computer and through the telephone lines. He is an attorney with Ahrens and D'Angeli Law Group. He practices right here in Arizona. He also practices in Idaho, and he's an estate planning attorney that has ventured over to the elder law side. And if you missed the first half, go up to our website at cypresshomecare.com. Click on the media button, and you'll find the radio show there, and you'll find many, many more. So when we left off in the second segment, in the first half, we came up really fast on that break. And David, you were telling the story, and I wanted you to finish the story because it was all revolving around planning and how important it is to have a plan. So if you could hit rewind just a little bit so we can at least bring our audience back right into the fold so they know exactly where you're at.
Right. So we were talking about, and I think that the major point that we were making was, look, the planning that you do when you're, later in life oftentimes looks a little bit different than the planning that you do earlier. And we were talking about a family that was kind of is having a crisis where the husband is going to end up needing some pretty immediate long-term care, and so we're changing some of the planning. And you had made a comment that I would think is just incredible, which is and so true, which is, hey, one of the things that you're dealing with in those situations is that, kids that you might even trust can do things that, to try and favor themselves or change what you're doing with your planning or whatever. And I was mentioning that when we were, one of the things that she's going to be doing, this wife, is changing her will so that she, instead of leaving her half of the estate directly to her husband, who's not able to manage assets anymore, she's going to be leaving it in a trust for him. And if she does it just the right way, that trust will help him manage those assets and appoint a trustee to handle them. And it will also protect him from having to count her half of the estate as assets of his as far as long-term care benefits go. And I mentioned that she's naming one of the kids as the trustee, and we were and basically saying, look, but before I ever, when she said I want to name one of the kids as the trustee for my husband, we had this long conversation about, do the kids get along? Do they trust each other? Are they able to set aside their own wants and desires and focus on what you want to have happen? Are they able to act in a neutral, good way? And those conversations are important, and they can't be left. The right answer 10 years ago might not be the right answer today about who should handle that estate, or who should make healthcare decisions for you, or financial decisions for you if you're not able to. And so, I think that not only is it important to put a really good plan into place, but it's important, especially as we're talking about aging and long-term care, that you look at that plan fairly often and sit down with someone and say, hey, is this the right thing? Is this still the right thing? Maybe this was the right thing 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but is it the right thing today? Or should we be looking at changing how we're handling some of this?
And I just want to bring it up, if there's a life-changing event, if there's a death in the family, if there's a divorce, a pandemic, someone becomes disabled, you move from one state to the next. I mean, you probably have a list of all other reasons to go revisit the plan, but all those things play into it. I mean, you may have named a trustee, and that trustee is no longer has capacity, and that's not
right.
the person you want to have as a trustee, or maybe that person has fallen out of favor. Whatever the reason, I mean, it is so important to revisit. So my question to you, I know there's not a magic solution, but what's the frequency? Is it like every 3 to 5 years? Is it every year? I mean, how frequently should you be visiting something like this?
Yeah, that's a great question, and the right answer is there isn't a year. But I'll tell you what should trigger it. It's the kind of things that you mentioned before. When something changes in your life that might affect how you want to deal with the period of your life where you might not be able to make decisions for yourself, or how you want your estate to be handled after you die, you probably should revisit this. I'll give you a really good example of something that you said earlier, a second ago. You said if you move states, you should make sure this is updated. And it's interesting. Arizona has a law that says that if a medical power of attorney, if a healthcare power of attorney was valid in the state where it was executed, then Arizona recognizes it and says it's valid. But even with that law, there's some interesting differences between Arizona and other states. And it's because I go back and forth between Idaho and Arizona, I'll tell you the difference between Idaho and Arizona. Arizona has a rule in their healthcare powers of attorney that says that to have a mental health care power of attorney, so the ability, for example, to sign commitment paperwork if someone has schizophrenia, for example, right? Or if someone has dementia and needs memory care where the door's locked. Arizona has this statute that says, hey, in addition to a normal health care power of attorney, you need to have a mental health care power of attorney where you give someone the right to make those decisions. And if you don't do that, in addition to your standard healthcare power of attorney in Arizona says you don't have those rights. So they will recognize the healthcare power of attorney from Idaho, but Idaho doesn't have mental health care powers at all, right? And so if you do a healthcare power of attorney in Idaho and you move to Arizona, then Arizona will recognize the Idaho healthcare power of attorney, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it will give your agent the right powers under Arizona law. And so I think that it is a really good idea to have those documents looked at whenever something changes. If you've named your son as your executor, for example, and he gets into a contentious divorce, you may not want him having the ability to handle your estate while he's dealing with this really difficult situation of his own, let alone kind of what that might mean legally for his role in your estate. Or you may want to change how you leave assets to your child that's going through a contentious divorce. You may want to say, hey, you know what? I don't necessarily want to leave my estate. They're just started this proceeding. They might still be sort of getting divorced at the time that I die. I know that the assets I leave them are their separate property, so it should be okay, but maybe I want to be more careful about how I do that. and make sure that I'm not accidentally changing something in their divorce. And so anytime you or your loved ones are going through life changes like that, you need to just sit down and review sort of what you have going on. I have seen people come into my office who say, David, we need to review documents. And I say, why? And they say, well, our executor died 25 years ago. And I go, well, okay, I'm glad we're sitting down together, but what the heck is happening here? You know, I mean, we needed to talk about this 24 years ago, you know? And so, yeah, any life change, take a look at it. But I don't ever tell my clients every 1 year or 3 years or 5 years, you got to go pay an attorney to look at this stuff. I don't think that's necessarily true. But when something changes, oh, and I'll tell you the other thing, Bob, you know, just since I'm talking about kind of life changes, here's the other big one. I tell people, when a headline grabs your attention and says, hey, is this going to affect me? Then you should talk, you know, if you call your estate planning attorney and have it reviewed. In 2026, for example, the amount of money that we're allowed to pass to our children tax-free when we die, the amount is going to change. At least it's set to right now. And what that means is there's going to be big headlines in 2026 that say, hey, you know, this amount is totally different now. Now, before you were allowed to give this amount of money to your kids, and now it's a lot less that you can give tax-free. Well, that could change things for a lot of people. If you read a headline and you go, how is this going to affect me? Then you need to have somebody you can call to ask that question.
No doubt. You know, we're almost down three segments. You can hear the music right now. So what I want to focus in on the fourth segment is how do you pay for long-term care? Because, you know, I'm in the in-home care services business. Some people call it non-medical. There are four payer sources. It's private pay, long-term care insurance, VA benefits, and Medicaid. And typically those are the same payer sources for assisted living, assisted living group homes. So would love, David, for you to help us take a deep dive mainly into VA benefits and Medicaid. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth. I've got David Wilson here in the studio via technology and the telephone. He is with Aaron DeAngeli Law Firm, and we will be right back. Stick around.
Now back to Health Futures, taking stock in you. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Cypress Home Care Solutions, Bob Roth.
Welcome back. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth, and if you're just tuning in, we're in our fourth and last segment with David Wilson. He is an attorney over at Aaron's and DeAngeli Law Group. They have an elder law practice here in the state of Arizona as well as Idaho. And David has talked about a whole host of things. If you missed them, go up to our website at cypresshomecare.com. Click on the media button. Third button down is radio show. You'll catch this one and many more. So I teed up the segment because this is probably the most important segment of our meeting here today. And that is really talking about paying for care, right? So I teed it up by saying, I know in the in-home care services business, it's private pay, long-term care insurance, and it's VA benefits and Medicaid. And I really want to do a deeper dive into VA benefits and Medicaid because that's what your firm really specializes in and really helps your clients navigate to those benefits when they can qualify. So if you wouldn't mind, can you take it from here and really talk about both of these?
I can, yeah, absolutely. I think the most important thing, and this is just, we have only a few minutes today, but this is really a topic we could spend a lot of time talking about. But
we're going to bring you back. We'll bring you back. We'll spend a whole segment talking about this, but let's give enough to our audience to really at least wet their whistle and really understand what this is all about.
And the biggest thing is just be aware that there are benefits available. They don't. Not every person is eligible for them, and they don't solve every problem. But there is definitely help out there to pay for long-term care. VA benefits for veterans is complicated. there are some veterans, the VA will pay for long-term care for some veterans who got hurt serving our country. If they have, when a veteran gets hurt serving our country, they have what's called a service-connected disability rating, and it can be 10% or 20%. If that number is 70% or higher, then the VA will pay for quite a bit of long-term care, nursing home care, if it becomes necessary. But for veterans that didn't get hurt serving our country, there are still benefits that are available. I always give the example of my grandfather, who served in World War II, and I'm grateful for his service. He served in McAllen, Texas, and he was basically a base physical fitness and social calendar person. He organized base dances and exercise. He did not get hurt serving our country. In fact, sometimes I think he just had a great time during the war. He really enjoyed what he did. But he served, and so the VA, even though he didn't get hurt serving our country, does have benefits that would have helped him pay for long-term care potentially if he needed it at the end of his life. There are asset limits, so you can't have too much money. And there are income limits. In other words, you can't have too much monthly income coming in. And the VA looks at both of those to determine whether or not they'll help pay for that care. A lot of times this program I'm talking about right now is referred to as aid and attendance. It's a payment that the VA will make to that veteran or to a surviving spouse of a veteran to help them pay for long-term care if they get to a point where medically that's what they need, and if they meet these requirements both on resources and on income, on assets and on income. But the tests about how much assets you can have and how much income you can have are complicated, but it really boils down to the veteran is allowed, or the veteran and his spouse is allowed to have a home and a vehicle and about $130,000, $138,489 is the exact number right now.
Wow.
And if they're below that number, then the VA says, okay, so let's keep talking about a potential benefit. If they're above that number, the VA says, no, you're not eligible. And there are things that the veteran can do sometimes in advance to make sure that that they will be eligible when the time comes. There's some planning that the veteran can do in order to say, hey, I think long-term care is coming up, and right now we have maybe our assets are a little bit above that line. Is there anything that we want to do in order to prepare? I've actually had veterans come into my office where I said, look, you've got a little bit too much cash here, but you have a home equity line of credit on your house. I think what we need to do is go ahead and pay down that home equity line of credit, and that will actually reduce the amount of cash you've got before we do an application. Now, that's about the most simple kind of planning you could do. There is much more complicated planning. But the idea is you look at those rules and you say, okay, what do we need to do in order to get eligible? If let's say that you have that veteran, it's a single veteran, they're not married, and they are eligible, they're under that $138,000 number. Right now, the VA that pension amount is about a little over $2,000 a month. That can be huge for a veteran that's paying for assisted living. The veteran has, say, Social Security income of $2,000 a month. Then an additional $2,000 coming from that VA pension might be the difference between the veteran being stable and being able to pay for most of assisted living care and not eating into savings very much, and the difference between that and having the veteran basically, running through savings in a few short months. And so that VA benefit can be really helpful. Most of the time when veterans call me about this kind of benefit, I say, okay, look, let's just run through the eligibility criteria together. Make sure you're going to be eligible. If you are, great, let's get you in contact with a VA veteran service officer who can help you apply for the benefit. Or if there's steps that you need to take, let's get that done. The other kind of benefit, though, that can help pay for long-term care is All-Tex or Medicaid. And, one of the things that I think is just really important about All-Tex or Medicaid is that just like the VA, there are limits on how much assets and how much income you can have and qualify. But just like those VA benefits, and the rules are different than the VA, they're not the same. But just like with the VA, there's planning that couples can do in order to make sure that they can get the help that they need when the time comes. And I'll just give you like a really, really brief example of that can kind of help illustrate that. And in fact, you had mentioned earlier, Bob, that you had talked to Katie Brenneman, and Katie is a great example of someone who has helped a lot of clients deal with this particular issue. And that is, sometimes with Altex, you can take assets like cash in the bank and turn them into monthly income under an annuity stream, or if you do it just right, so that you can meet those criteria without losing the money. And that takes planning ahead and making sure that you know what those rules are so that you can access the benefit when the time comes. But the big thing that people don't get is that there are things you can do. You are not limited to just becoming indigent to get those benefits.
Yeah, impoverishing yourself, having to get divorced, all these things that I think most Americans think they have to do in order to qualify for a benefit. And, David, I definitely need to probably have you on for an entire show to really talk about how to access these benefits because they're available. You described your dad. My dad was a cook in the Army, and he never saw action, but he was a veteran, and he has access to VA benefits. And you know what? There are a lot of people that just don't realize that those things are out there. David Wilson, I can't thank you enough for joining me here today. David is with the firm of Aarons DeAngeli Law Group, and you have provided some great, useful information for our listeners, and I promise to have you back, and next time have you right here in the studio with me. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. We'll be back next Friday. Thank you for joining us today. Have a great weekend. We'll be back next Friday. Take care.
There's no place like home. You've been listening to Bob Roth's Health Futures. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call Cypress Home Care Solutions at 602-264-8009. That's 602-264-8009. Or visit cypresshomecare.com. Be sure to join Health Futures with Bob Roth every Friday at noon, right here on Money Radio 1510 and 105.3 FM.